Alright, so let's start the experiment number 9, identification of common ions. In this experiment, you are going to identify 6 anions: chloride, bromide, iodide, carbonate, phosphate and sulfate. And among these 6 anions, 3 are oxyanions and 3 are halide anions. It is, I would say, a similar experiment as you did in atomic properties lab, where you identified different cations based on flame test, and you saw that different cations, as per their emission spectrum, they impart different colors to the flame. So in this case, you are not using any flame, but then you would definitely record the observations based on the precipitate or the clear solution. Alright, so you would do actually 3 tests in order to identify these 6 anions, and these are silver nitrate test, barium chloride test and chlorine water test. Now let's focus on the observation part. So if you see this chart actually clearly defines different observations, and then you have to be very clear and very particular in recording the observations, because based on your observations you can identify the anions and also identify your unknowns. So you can see your solution can be clear, opaque, cloudy, milky, colorless, heavy precipitate, light precipitate or flocculent. So basically you have to read this chart carefully in order to identify your Now where are you going to write or record your observations? So towards the end of this experiment, you would have the report sheet. There you can see that it is divided into the 3 parts: silver nitrate test, barium chloride test and chlorine water test. And these are the 6 anions, and then you have 2 unknowns. So you are going to record the observation based on the chart what we saw before. This is the setup for the test tube rack, having the different test tubes for different anions: chloride, bromide, iodide, carbonate, sulfate, phosphate, unknown number 1, unknown number 2, and these 2 are the blue cap tubes. They are the reservoir tubes for the unknowns. And then if you see, here are the test solutions for different anions: for chlorine, sodium chloride; for bromine, sodium bromide; for iodide, sodium iodide; carbonate, sodium carbonate; sulfate, sodium sulfate; and the last one for phosphate, sodium phosphate. Okay, now the reagents for the 3 different tests. For silver nitrate test, we would need 0.1 molar silver nitrate, 6 molar HNO3. For barium chloride test, we would need 0.1 molar barium chloride and 6 molar HCl. For chlorine water test, we would need chlorine water and hexane. And these are the waste containers. For the chlorine water test, we would need the organic waste and halogenated organic waste, actually, because we are going to use halogens in that. And then we would need the aqueous waste for all other tests. Okay, so now I'm going to add the different test solutions in the different anions test tubes: chloride, bromide, iodide, sodium carbonate for carbonate ion, sodium sulfate for sulfate, and the last one is sodium phosphate for phosphate ion. Okay, now I'm going to add the unknown number 1 from the reservoir unknown tube, and this is the unknown number 2 tube. Okay, so now I'm going to do the silver nitrate test, and then in all the 8 tubes. Basically we have all the anions in there. Now I'm going to add silver nitrate in every test tube. Okay, now after that you are supposed to record the observations. So this is the chloride. See that, how does it look? Okay, this is the bromide. Iodide. Carbonate. Sulfate, phosphate. Okay, this is the unknown number 1, and this is the unknown number 2. So you are going to record the observations for all the 8 test tubes in the first row when you just added silver nitrate into the test tubes. And while recording the observations, you have to be very careful whether it is the heavy precipitate, for example, let's say here the heavy precipitate. Let's say here you see the light precipitate or clear, something like that. So you have to be very careful when you will record the observations here. These are just the samples. I'm not sure whether these are the observations actually. So you have to see the recording carefully to record the observations. Okay, now I'm going to do the second part of the silver nitrate test. After adding this silver nitrate, I'm going to add 6 molar nitric acid to all the test tubes. And then you are going to record the observations carefully and record it in the chart. Okay, now again see the observations. After adding nitric acid, this is the chloride ion. Bromide ion. Iodide. Carbonate. See if there is any change after adding the nitric acid. Sulfate, phosphate, unknown number 1, and here is the unknown number 2. Okay, so after the silver nitrate test, I discarded all the solutions and then I rinsed the test tube with the DI water, and they are already ready for the barium chloride test. I already added all the test solutions in the test tube. Now I am going to add 6 drops of barium chloride in each of the test tubes. Okay, so now you should clearly see the observations for chloride ion after adding barium chloride, bromide ion, iodide, carbonate, sulfate, phosphate, unknown number 1, unknown number 2. Okay, so now I'm going to add hydrochloric acid in each of the test tubes. Okay, so now you can see the observations again for chloride ion after adding the 6 molar HCl, bromide, iodide, carbonate, sulfate, phosphate, unknown number 1, and unknown number 2. Okay, so now I'm going to perform the chlorine water test, and I discarded all the solutions from the barium chloride test, rinsed the test tube well with DI water, and then I already added all the 6 test solutions into the respective test tubes. Now I'm going to add 10 drops of hexane into every test tube. This is the organic compound, hexane. So let me explain you what happens in the chlorine water test. So you just saw I added hexane into the test tube. So let's say this is the test tube. I added here solutions of the chloride ion, bromide ion, iodide ion, and carbonate, sulfate, phosphate. Right, so this is the solution for the test solution. And then I added hexane. And the third thing what I will add in this is chlorine water, Cl2 water. And then we will shake the test tube. And after shaking the test tube, you would see basically the solution will be partitioned into 2 layers. So this is the organic layer. Organic layer means this is hexane, and this is the aqueous layer. Now why it will form two layers? Because organic hexane, it is lower density than water, so hexane will float over aqueous layer. You are going to record the color in the organic layer. After adding everything, you would again shake the test tube, then you are going to record the color into the organic layer. You would see that you won't be surprised if you would see that there is no change in carbonate, sulfate and phosphate, because this test is mainly for chloride, bromide and iodide. So what happens actually, this is a single displacement reaction. Let's say you would use NaBr, because one of the test solution is NaBr, aqueous, and then you would add chlorine water to it, right? Chlorine water is in the form of it's basically water where chlorine gases pass through it, so it's just chlorine kind of mixed with the water. So now this is a single displacement reaction. If you will balance it, you would get 2NaCl plus Br2. So chlorine is more reactive than bromine, so chlorine actually can displace bromine from the solution, and bromine will get dissolved with hexane, and that's the color you would see in the hexane layer due to the bromine. So that's the test for the bromide ion. Similarly, you should see a reaction with the iodide ion, 2NaCl plus I2. So again, this I2 and this Br2 will give color in hexane layer. You will not see any color due to the chlorine, because chlorine will displace chlorine. Actually, you will see no reaction. So try to see these, try to apply this concept when you would record the observations for the chlorine water test for these 6 anions. Okay, now I am going to add the chlorine water into all the 8 test tubes. Okay, so now these are the observations after adding the chlorine water for all the 8 test tubes. This is the chloride ion. You can see the 2 layers in there, but you would see any color in the upper hexane layer. This is the bromide ion. I can see a slight yellowish color in the upper hexane layer. I did add more of the hexane and the sodium bromide into the test tube in order to show you the clear distinction between the colors. And this is, you can see this is the iodide ion. You can see clearly the purplish color in the hexane layer in case of the iodide ion. Again, in this also you must be seeing the more volume, but I added the solutions in order to show you the color distinction. Okay, now this is carbonate, sulfate, phosphate, okay, unknown number 1, and here is your unknown number 2. Let me add a couple of more drops of the hexane in order to rise the volume, so you would be having a clear idea. So I am adding hexane in order to increase the volume of the upper layer. Okay. and this is the unknown number 1. Let me add the hexane to this as well. Okay. Okay, now you are going to record the complete observations on this report sheet, and then after that you are going to figure out what is your unknown number A, unknown number 1, and unknown number B, or unknown number 2. Keeping in mind, you would have one unknown from the chloride, bromide, or iodide, and the second unknown might be from your sulfate, carbonate, and phosphate, or the vice versa. So basically, one should be your oxyanion and one should be your halide anion. They won't be both halide anion, they won't be both oxyanion. So clearly make your observations chart. This is very important to figure out your unknowns. After figuring out your unknowns, make sure you finish your report sheet by writing all of your answers here, post-lab questions, and you try to answer these questions as well. And then on this next page, you are going to write the balanced chemical equations, ionic equations, and net ionic equations between silver nitrate and sodium iodide, barium chloride and sodium sulfate, the way we learned in the lecture. You don't have to worry about the labels, obviously. Just leave it as such, that unknown number 1 and unknown number 2. And then you are going to write the formula of the anion. That means it could be, if it is sulfate, you would write SO4 minus 2, like phosphate PO4 minus 3, chloride Cl negative, bromide Br negative, iodide I negative. So you are not going to write the formula of the ionic compound, you must write the formula of only the anion. Alright, so this is the end of the experiment number 9, identification of the common anions, or you can say common ions.